Hello, welcome in and welcome back. My name is Dustin. This is a podcast called Boy Meets Therapy. We are talking about all of your favorite mental health topics, things that are important, all that good fun stuff. So today I want to give you a couple of bits of information before I jump into this interview. This interview is with Eric Batchelder, who is awesome and so eloquently spoken, and I could not have told him that enough. I think that he is really, really clear at explaining what he explains, which is why I'm so happy that he came on. He is a social worker and therapist based in Nashville, Tennessee. Yes, we are going down south for the first time, I think. I'm trying to think of if I've had any guests from the South. I don't know. I can't remember. I know that I am from the South. And so that's why I'm probably even making any kind of deal about this. But we are going to go down south to Nashville for a little bit and talk with him about some things that are really important, but can be a little deep and can be a little heavy. So I wanted to give you just like a little warning about that. There are some conversations about domestic violence, interpersonal violence in this conversation. That's kind of the topic of what we're talking about. So I want to give you like some trigger warnings and just let you know that if that's something that's not going to be comfortable for you or is not going to work for you, this might not be the episode for you. But I think it's a really, really important topic. So I really encourage everyone to stay and enjoy it. But if this is something that's going to be a little too heavy for you, you might want to skip this one. So I want to give you a couple of references, things that we reference in the episode that I want you to just be aware of. I'm going to explain it again in the episode, but there are some terms that are kind of like official or clinical terms that we use that I want to just run by you. So whenever we say IPV, we are referring to interpersonal violence. Whenever we say DV, we are referring to domestic violence. And we're actually going to talk about in the beginning the difference between the two of those. So that's going to be really helpful. There are also two things that are linked below that I just want to tell you about. If you want to look at them, they're linked in the about. So there is the LGBT power and control wheel, and there is also the equality wheel. So these are things that are created. If you've ever heard of a feelings wheel, like these are things that are visual representations that are created to help you kind of like understand a topic a little bit more simply. And I love them because they're very simple, and I don't like for things to be complicated. That's kind of why I made this like whole show. But yeah, so I'll link those below if you want to look at those at any point during the interview. If you don't, then don't look at them. So I want to jump into this one and just let you know there's some heavy stuff here. We're talking about something that's really, really important. Queer couples, domestic violence, what that looks like, why that might be different, what the response is. Are there some cultural factors that are at play here? So this one is a really important one. And I want to just give you that quick intro and introduce you to Eric. Eric is such a sweet, sweet baby boy. I need to not be so over complimentary. But yeah, actually, that's not true. I could be over complimentary if I want. So Eric, you're incredible. So I'm gonna throw you right into this conversation. This is my full conversation with Eric about the incredibly important topic of domestic violence amongst queer people and queer couples. Okay, hello. Hi, Eric. Hi, how are you?
Doing great, Dustin. How are you?
I am so good. I'm so happy that you're here. We briefly kiki a little bit in voice messages last night, which I love.
Yes, I love a good voice message. Thank you
I
for
do. I
having.
used to hate them, but then I got really into them and how much personality you can put into a voice message versus just words on a screen.
Yeah,
And
I do
so
that a lot, especially sometimes with text. I feel like sometimes with just like my face or like pictures on social media, things can look so serious. People are like, "Oh, you look like me and Charlie XCX," but when you talk, you're very personable and kind. So that's why I like to send voice messages so that my messages don't look like catty or rude.
I love Mean Charlie XCX. I kind of feel like I want to look like Mean Charlie XCX. Like that's kind of the vibe I want. This I don't want to use the word excited, but I am looking forward to talking about this topic with you because I think it's a really, really super important one that I think does not get talked about enough when it comes to gay couples, queer couples. And I'm going to use the term, I want to go ahead and give a disclaimer. I'm going to use the phrasing like same sex a lot. I know that some people have like issues with that, but I'm using it because the context in which we're going to be talking about it is kind of like IPV, interpersonal violence, and DV, domestic violence. Anyway, so I want to ask you a little bit about your experience working with this topic and this issue. And first of all, I've got to ask you, where are you located? Even though I already know.
So I am located in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm not a transplant of another state. I'm Tennessee born and raised.
Mhm.
So, with my experience working with survivors of domestic violence, so I have both my bachelor's and a master's in social work. So, for both years of my practicum, for my generalist bachelor's and then my clinical concentration for my master's, I was at an agency where we worked with survivors of violent crimes. So, I was one of their Spanish speaking interns, and this is where I got to really work and hone in with survivors of domestic violence and other crimes, but also I also had the opportunity to work with several queer identifying survivors of domestic violence.
Mhm. And that I think is like when I figured that out, that's what really piqued my interest because I think there is this, and we talked like just for like 2 seconds about this like last night, but there's also this interesting kind of intersection of identities when it comes to like domestic violence and queer people because we have people that are a lot of times of the same sex and gender identity. So there's
Mhm,
this interesting like perspective of violence in that might be different from when we look at like cisgender heterosexual couples. So
mhm.
I'm really like interested to kind of like talk about that and get into that. And I think are you cool if we just go right in? Like I have so many questions. I'm like so like anxious to ask you all of these
Of
things.
course, let's just dive in.
So I want to know a little bit about your definition of intimate partner violence. Or I should ask you, so do you use IPV or do you use DV terms? Like what terms do you use?
I go between both, depending on the situation. Like with intimate partner violence, when I think of intimate partner violence and how it was explained to me, it was the couple has either been in a relationship formally, either in or out, and there is the use of like not just physical violence. When we think domestic violence, I feel like people always think it's just physical, just hitting, but it's threats, it's stalking, it is stalking in person or on the internet, it is financial abuse, it is sexual abuse.
Mhm.
So it's things like trigger warning, like rape or sexual assault. That is when I think of intimate partner violence. Domestic violence, I feel like is very similar in itself as well.
You're exactly right. I think what you're hinting at is like domestic also is includes in in the familial unit. So it's not just like between intimate partners. It can also include like,
Yes.
parents to children, children to children, like, anything that falls in that umbrella.
Yes, non-IPV.
You said something really interesting though. You said financial.
Mhm.
So I know that that's not like the main topic, but that's kind of what piqued my interest. Like, could you just like a couple sentences about financial abuse? Because this is something that I think a lot of people don't even think about or talk about
I know we
when it
need to
comes
get
to like
the power
finances.
control wheel. So
Hmm.
with financial abuse, that can look like the perpetrator withholding money from the victim or for the survivor in this scenario. So that could be not letting them work. That could be not letting them go out and spend money. That could be them giving them only a certain amount of money for groceries. Sometimes when we see like in relationships where there's power and control, the perpetrator in the relationship is not allowing the victim to work, sometimes so that they can have that control over them, so that they can stay, so that they
Yeah.
won't leave.
Mm. So yeah, that's really interesting. It's this concept of like one partner withholding resources from another partner that would then allow them to like not be as dependent on one. So I want to go into like some of the dynamics as well. So some of the ways that domestic violence can look like in same-sex relationships compared to heterosexual ones. So is there anything that sticks out to you like that's coming up to your mind initially whenever I'm asking you about differences between same-sex couples and cisgender heterosexual couples?
I feel like the differences are also in their similarities. I feel like there is this stereotype within domestic violence that it's always the man, usually toxic masculinity, who is the perpetrator in the relationship, and the woman in like cisgender relationships is often the victim. And sometimes in gay relationships, there is still that stereotype, especially because I worked very close with the Latino community, that into like a gay relationship with two men, that the one who is more manly is the perpetrator, and the one who is more effeminate, or I guess we would say like the top and the bottom, stereotypically, is the bottom is the victim and the top is the abuser. But in both cases, with cisgender and with both same sex relationships, it's not true. I have had clients where it's flipped. I've seen it in clubs before I really understood with domestic violence that it was flipped. So it's not always, the person that we see as stronger or more manly or the provider. Sometimes it is the more submissive role in the relationship
Mhm.
that is the perpetrator.
Yeah, that's huge. That's like a huge thing to consider because I think there's this stereotype of when we think of cisgender couples, right? Is like the man is abusive and the woman is like always passive. And that's not always true.
No, it's harmful. It's
Mhm.
harmful, but that's just why we're here kind of deconstructing this and really looking at it that like this isn't true. Domestic violence, being in an IPV relationship, it doesn't matter if you're the submissive, if you're more of the top, it just can happen.
Mhm. So are there some like unique psychological or relational factors at play? So when we talk about like internalized homophobia or fear of outing or minority stress, are
Mhm.
any of those things in your experience, have you kind of seen any of those things play out when it comes to like an IPV situation?
Yes, for sure. I know we discussed this a little bit last night, or I guess really early this morning, but using
Like
a
3 a.m.
like 3 a.m. did not take my magnesium, but looking at it from like a cognitive behavioral therapy approach that everyone has core beliefs and core values about themselves. And often with gay men that I've seen, and in this case, I'm using gay men specifically because that's a population I've worked with a lot, that there is this core belief that something is defective and that something is wrong with us, that we're not normal. So to enter these relationships and have a partner where we kind of feel like sometimes it's the first. For many of my clients, it was their first relationship that ended up being a very dangerous relationship for them. And it is this thought that like something's wrong. Something is wrong with me, that it must be me, it must be my fault that this relationship is going this way. I must be the one doing something wrong. I must not be putting enough effort into the relationship. We can go on and on and on with a lot of these self-doubts that really make it really difficult and kind of unique to these situations. But then also, I think recently we see how I guess I'm referring to this Netflix show that just came out called Boots. There are a lot of internalized homophobia in there. We see the closeted, I don't know what their titles are. I'm so sorry. But the one of the main, I guess I would say, antagonist, he is this closeted man, and he is using the F slur towards the main character in the story. So we kind of see that internalized homophobia. We can see that for sure in relationships. I have seen messages from my clients where their abusers, who are also identifying as queer or gay, are calling them the F slurs, or calling them these terrible slurs or other slurs in their language. So we're seeing that project as well. It's to
Yeah.
minimize, it's to kind of make them feel smaller, kind of takes you back to this place. I feel like it's sometimes often where these names are things that we've heard growing up, that
Mhm.
our clients have heard growing up. So it's almost like taking them back to a place where they feel really small and that something is wrong with them for the reason that this relationship is not going right.
Mhm. That is like I think what you just said, I'm just probably gonna like blow smoke up your ass this entire interview because like I think like what you've said is like really incredible. It's interesting like the perspective that you're bringing of when people that are very very new in queer relationships, right? Like that they're coming into you mentioned like gay men is what you were talking about specifically. So like I'm just gonna go there. Like I just pictured this young gay kid who grew up in whatever environment, dealing with whatever homophobia that they've dealt with or whatever level it could have been, the internalized version of it, all this stuff. And then they finally get into a relationship. And so they've taken these things, and this is me just like kind of assuming this stuff. Like, so they've taken all of these messages that they've heard their entire lives, and then they now have a partner that is kind of reaffirming or using these against them in a way that is really putting them in a position to feel like there really is something like fundamentally wrong with me in the way that I think and what I like how I'm interacting or perceiving the world.
Mhm.
Because I feel like as young gay kids, a lot of times, for me in general, right? Like there's this inherent feeling that like, oh, something's wrong with me. Like there's something wrong with me. So when I get into a relationship, my first relationship, and I have a partner who is telling me things like, why did you say this? What you said was wrong, or why did so I'm constantly hearing these messages. I could see how someone would be really particular, like a young gay kid would be really particularly vulnerable in those relationships.
Mhm. And I think so as well that because domestic violence and interpersonal violence are so niche and not very talked about, there are other things that can happen in these relationships that a lot of people don't really recognize that they are in, a potentially dangerous relationship. They could be in a very dangerous relationship and they're not even being hit. They
Mm,
could be controlled. They could be taken advantage of sexually. They could be kind of like I said, controlled. Sorry, I just like blanked there.
yeah.
I really love kind of looking with clients and using the power and control wheel, and they have adapted the power and control wheel for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans relationships. So we have things like using coercion and threats, using intimidation, emotional abuse, using isolation, denying, minimizing, or blaming. So that's where we're going to see a lot of gaslighting. Like, I didn't say that. If children are involved, using children, kind of using children to relay messages, using privilege, using economic abuse, like we had talked about earlier. I also, as well, think with IPV that it's really important to address like no is no, whether you're in a relationship or not, when it comes to sex. I think a lot of times with, as gays, we don't really have an expectation. We don't know. A lot of these things aren't taught to us. So it's almost like a rite of passage for people when they turn 18 to go on dating apps like Grindr, whatever. There's plethora of them and potentially find themselves in unsafe situations because that's all that we know. I mean, if you look in media and social media, hookup culture at this time is still very glorified. And I think hookup culture can be really dangerous and almost kind of lead to these things where, like, oh, it feels like this is okay because I have to do this because I went over here or I made the conscious decision.
Mm,
I'm dating this person, so I have to have sex with them even when I don't want to. Or I'm dating this person, so I have to cut off my whole family because they said they love me and this is what's best for me.
mm. I this is something I talk about with friends a lot is like the ability to say no to someone and how
Mhm.
difficult it can really be. And it's interesting when we talk about things like consent or like using dating apps and I know you mentioned 18, but like obviously we know that there are people that are under 18 that are like using Grinder and
Oh, for
you
sure.
know Sniffies and all these other apps. And I'm not demonizing the app. I'm just saying that obviously that is something that is potentially dangerous to someone who is really young, doesn't know, and is getting into a lot of those situations. And it's interesting, this idea. I like don't even think I fully conceptualized no until like maybe 7 or 8 years ago or something. It's like the idea that you go to someone's house, you meet them on Grindr, whatever. You go over to their place, you're there, you realize I'm not really into them, but there's this idea of I'm already here. And maybe there's this feeling of I don't want them to feel bad, or I don't want them to think that I'm like, whatever, or I don't want them to whatever. And so you end up engaging in whatever like activity, even though there's this feeling in your head of I really don't want to do this. Or maybe there's an uncomfortability of like saying I want to leave or I have to leave. There's like almost an inability to do that.
I think also, I'm not only speaking for myself, but like for I feel like the majority of gay men that we're people pleasers. I think people pleasing comes from the root of anxiety of wanting people to like us, of wanting to be accepted, of wanting to feel seen. So, of course, you're in this new experience. You want to feel that attraction. You want someone to be attracted to you. You want to be liked. So sometimes if you don't know any better, I mean, it's not your fault because, this is your first time living. and these are new things, you're going to say yes to these things, or you're going to feel like you're obligated to so that you're not causing any problems. You don't want someone to put you down. You don't want whatever situation to come through it. So it makes sense why you would feel obligated to do, things that you don't want to do despite even saying no.
Yeah. And it's interesting too because of all these things that interplay in those situations when we're talking about like I don't want to do something. And I think there's an important differentiation too between people say like stepping out of your comfort zone, right? Like
Mhm.
I think there's a difference between, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone and I'm doing something new and exciting versus I'm stepping out of my comfort zone and doing something that I'm uncomfortable with.
Potentially dangerous.
Yeah, and it's potentially dangerous. And that's where I think there's a lot of things oh my god, we could really, really go off on that. I have to I'm like, Dustin, reel it in because I'm feeling myself pulling like, no, 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 let's go down this way. Um, so I want to ask you a little bit about in your work, like how might traditional gender roles or even the absence of traditional gender roles affect how violence is expressed and understood in queer relationships?
I spoke about this a little yesterday too. That one of my favorite trick questions to ask is, what does a healthy gay relationship look like? And the answer is, baby, there is not one because we're not really shown. So then that's whenever my clients are like, I haven't really seen a healthy relationship. In their cases, for my clients, their parents who were in heterosexual relationships, they weren't healthy either. So if you don't know what a healthy cisgender relationship looks like, how would you expect to know what a healthy same-sex relationship looks like? But we
Right.
would call it, I remember my supervisor would be like, a relación sana. I worked with a lot of Spanish-speaking survivors of domestic violence. So asking like, ¿qué es una relación sana? Like, what does a healthy relationship look like? And a lot of times it's us kind of sitting there because, I mean, if you don't know, if you didn't grow up seeing one, how would you know?
Hmm.
What does a healthy relationship look like? I feel like there's stereotypes that you can use for a healthy relationship between cisgender couples, but with gay relationships or queer same-sex relationships, dynamics are very different. It's not always just, like stereotypical, like the top and bottom. It could be first and first. There's so many endless possibilities of what we could look like. Not every, it's not always like who's the boy and who's the girl. It's
Right.
not always, it's so intricate. I feel like we're still learning what those healthy relationship looks like. But there is like the equality wheel that I like to use. So it's talking about using non-threatening behavior, respect, trust and support, honesty and accountability, responsible parenting, when that's applied, shared responsibilities, economic partnership, negotiation and fairness. Yeah, and those things are things that you can look up. Anyone can look up online. So, like the power and control wheel, LGBT, or the equality and peace wheel. I believe it's equality. Yeah, the equality wheel. What a nonviolence relationship looks like, and it kind of gives a frame of like what does it look like. I remember showing my clients the power and control wheel, and they'd be like, "I didn't even realize that was in a dangerous relationship. I just thought that was normal because that's what I grew up seeing. This is what." It wasn't always, I didn't realize it's more than just violence. It's more than just my partner forcing things on me, or, I can name any situation that there's other things that can contribute and make up intimate partner violence relationship.
Yeah. I'm gonna put all of those like wheels below because I think that's such a super easy, simple guide to look at. It's interesting too, because I think when cultural things come into play, when it comes to like the idea that the man is the provider in a relationship. And I would argue that it's not inherently a bad like a terrible evil idea, right? But I think that over time there's a lot of connotations that come with that of this person is the provider, aka this person is holding the financial power, aka whoever like control has this kind of power typically has power in like other situations. And also in cisgender relationships it's like typically the man is like physically stronger anyway. So there's all these things that come along with it. Do you think that those kind of like cultural things that we have and that come up with these ideas, do you think that those play in these like same-sex relationships where maybe two people are of the same sex, but one person is kind of appearing to be in one certain role or the other? Actually, oh my God, let me catch myself because you literally just said earlier that it's not always what it looks like. It's not
Yeah.
always the stereotypical vision of what it looks like, and sometimes it comes from the opposite end.
Yeah, I was
So
also
let me stop myself there. Yeah.
put in there like a cultural consideration. So I do live in Nashville, the South, and then I do come from the Hispanic culture, which Hispanic culture and Southern culture are very family oriented, very gender role oriented. So I feel like even within living in the South, people still kind of expect like someone is someone this was about to be gross. It was like this movie reference. It was like who's doing the bending and who it was like something I don't remember where that came from. But it's like, who is the like provider and who's the one like kind of staying home or who's the one it's like, the idea of like two people working, oh, you have to because you're the man, or it's like these things that just kind of make it confusing for everybody. It can make it frustrating. I think because of these stereotypes, it makes it harder for people in queer violent relationships to open up. There's that fear of not being accepted. So it's like, oh, this is why you shouldn't be in a gay relationship. This is why, or like, what do you mean? Like, you're a man. Like, how are you letting another man beat you? Like, all these, like, this fear of things, especially now coming from like the Hispanic culture perspective. I work with youth and children, and with my Hispanic kids and youth, and being one, there's this fear of like telling your parents things because they're going to get mad at you. That carries into adulthood. I had adult clients who are like my parents' age in domestic violence relationships or had formerly been in one, still feeling the effects, who still could not muster up the courage to tell their parents. Their parents know that they were gay, but they didn't want to tell them that this had happened to them because they were scared they would get upset, not
Mm.
for them, but at them.
Yeah. Was there also, do you think, this element of shame? You mentioned earlier how it's like, what do you mean? You're a man. You can't get like, beat by another man. What does that mean?
Oh,
Do
for
you think that
sure.
that definitely played into the shame aspect of, because what's coming up for me is if I'm, a man and I'm a gay man and I hold all these ideas about myself, and then I get into this relationship where someone is physically aggressive or abusive towards me, and then I come out of that, there might be this. What I'm thinking of is there's this fear of me of saying that because I don't want to be perceived as, as it being some kind of weakness or, of course you got, you're just, you know what I mean? Like I hope
I
that
only know
that
what
makes
you mean.
sense.
Like, yes, for sure. I think I don't want to say that like all gay men carry shame, but using a trauma focused or a trauma approach, um, we always assume that everyone has trauma. So sometimes with gay men, I just kind of assume that we all have some type of shame, whether it's the same or different from who we are in our sexuality. Even if you're confident and you love yourself, there's still that shame that someone at one point in your life, someone or people have made you feel about yourself, even if
Mm,
it's just a little bit. So I think that can bring out. And for a lot of these men that were still very new to their sexuality or didn't really understand it through and through, that shame is still there and it's still really big to carry, and I could tell when they're
mm,
really hesitant on sharing.
mm. What does that feel like with you, like in session with someone when you just mentioned, like, I could feel that when they're sharing? Like, what is that like for you to listen to? I mean, I could just imagine. Yeah.
Now, I'm a lot more prepared for it and I know what to expect. I think back then when I was a little intern, it was very odd for me because as a man, I'm not very used to seeing other men cry. Living in the
Mm.
South, that is not something we really see.
Nope.
Being a Latino, that is not something we really see. So I'm having these men, somewhere my age, somewhere older, sitting in front of me, and they would cry. I would, hold that space for them. And, silence is a good form of communication. Just let it feel it. I like to steal from Lana Del Rey, and I say, instead of running away from feelings, run towards them. Like our hearts are meant to break to let the light shine in. So
Mhm.
this is okay. So at first it was like I had to check myself. I was like, this feels weird, but I understand why they're crying. I just wasn't something I was used to. But being a therapist, sometimes you just expect people are gonna cry
Yeah.
in front of you. So it was hard. I mean, it was doing these things for the first time, but then also understanding like this is really powerful for them to feel vulnerable, to allow them, to cry in front of you or to share these things. Like it's hard for them too, but just, asking. I think my favorite question to ask is like, well, how can I support you during this time? I feel like sometimes, especially with green therapists, we want to throw things and like, solutions and interventions. But sometimes I just like to kind of ask, like, how can I support you? Like, what do you need? A lot of times when I met with survivors of domestic violence, it was usually right after the incident had happened. So their adrenaline is still super, super high. It might have been the first time it happened, or it could have been a continuation of years and years and years of the relationship.
Hmm. What do you, speaking of that, kind of like the crisis moment, like right after something happens, how do you think issues related to like distrust of law enforcement come or fear of discrimination impact how people might decide to react to some of these situations? And I know it's also tough because, when you're kind of in a crisis or something really big just happened, there's like shock, there's all these, there's all these feelings that come up.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know, what do you think about and related to the issues that I just mentioned?
So I think it's different for each area. Where I interned, we were part of the police department, like we were our own special division inside of a building that was locked secured. So there was police presence there, but it was also like talking to my clients because I did work with a lot of undocumented clients that I'm not a police officer. Like I'm not here to try and get you in trouble, is that we're here to help. But, living in the South, living in an area in a more red area, though Davidson County in Nashville is a blue state, there's still going to be those fear and those lack of distrust. So it's, being aware of that, just voicing that out to my clients, just letting them know that it is, I completely understand why this could be really scary, or like even the fear to report, that fear of that they're not going to believe, that fear of that they're going to get deported, or that fear of people are going to find out. There's a lot of fears, and we just kinda sit through and we talk about it sometimes.
Mhm. Well, it's really especially important now with the current political climate where we have like such an increased presence of things like ICE and these like raids that are happening for someone to feel like they could actually even reach out to some kind of like not even just law enforcement, but like any agency at all and ask for help when they need it. I don't know. Do you think that has been like impacted anyway by the current political climate?
I definitely think so. I know whenever my internship had ended, so in May, Nashville had a huge hit of ICE. And I remember speaking to some of my friends, and people weren't showing up to sessions, people weren't showing up to group,
Mm,
people weren't showing up because of this fear. But something that we did and something that I was a part of is we would go into some of these areas in the community. So domestic violence, I'm going to start with this. It does not care if you're rich. It does not care your socioeconomic status. It does not care the color of your skin, but we would have higher incidents of domestic violence in lower socioeconomic areas. So we would go to different apartments with police officers and other members in the communities. So with the agencies, and talk about our services, talk about what we were there for, to show that we're there and to, let them know. A lot of times I think now I always explain this, that at least in Tennessee, and I'm not sure if this is nationwide just because I'm exclusive to Tennessee, if you're a victim of crime and you make a police report, it it works towards eligibility for citizenship for a U visa. So that is kind of, it was not like necessarily an incentive, but it felt people help people feel more safe. And then we also had a Spanish speaking police officer who would go out and speak with the communities, and that we're not here, they're not there to terrorize and to threaten them. Like we're trying to show these resources so that you're not in this situation, so that you're not suffering, so that you see that there's help out there.
mhm. Do
Because
you
our
feel like
oh
yeah.
say our services are free. Like you did not have to have insurance to receive counseling or crime victim advocacy services.
How do you think or are there trauma responses that you feel like show up differently in queer clients, potentially because of cultural or identity related factors? Like, do you feel like I don't know, is anything coming up for you there?
I think so. I think so. I had spoken to a few, and it was almost like this fear of the police, kind of like this fear of being judged. It almost feels like you go back to school and it's like the bully and like the person who is being bullied. When we would have like a referral list, they would put on like when the client was queer, because we had, therapists that did focus a little bit more working with the queer population, whether they identified with that community and could relate that better with the client. Sometimes clients, I feel like they do want someone who is queer working with them to kind of understand the relationship, because queer relationships are not how they're perceived, I guess, like 30 years ago.
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting when we talk about things that are so sensitive, like someone coming from a situation of interpersonal violence or someone coming from a situation that was particularly traumatic that had directly to do with a queer relationship, like
Mhm.
how important it might be to have someone who's also queer identified to process and unpack that with.
Yeah, and they're very out in the community. I know last year and this year, that they had a booth at Pride. The agency had a booth at Pride, and which is huge in Nashville. So like we had like our counseling resources just so that that was coming out more into the community. And I know in Nashville that I believe that there's a police officer who's a liaison for like the LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
So that is, an advantage, but for those living in smaller communities where police are not as progressive, I can see why too it's even harder.
Mhm.
Because living in a city can be safe, but it can also be dangerous. But I think we have to consider like our LGBT brothers and sisters, and I don't know if that's correct to say, our LGBT other family members.
You're doing the Rihanna thing. Have you seen the Rihanna interview where
I
she where where
explain.
she's like,
Yes.
and the gender appropriations? Like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, let me get
No,
back
I
in.
love it.
I can see why it's also we need to consider like our other community members in the LGBTQ community. Hold on.
You're perfect. This is so perfect. I wanna leave this in.
Oh my god. I can see why it's difficult, for those in the LGBTQ community in smaller rural areas to feel fear of the police, just because sometimes those stereotypes about them must be true, and it's harder when those resources aren't there, where they might be an hour or 2 away.
Mhm. Well, it's almost like it's too yeah, there's this authoritative energy that comes with police a lot of the time, and I think that queer people a lot of times have been, like, not really treated well by authority figures. So it's like, to see someone representative of that can be really, really difficult. That's also a whole other, like, side stream that I think we could take. I think, interested talking about you mentioned a little bit about, like, working with people. So I'm wondering, in your experience or whatever, like, knowledge or wisdom you have on this, how do you think instances of domestic violence or interpersonal violence impact someone's sense of identity, especially when it comes from another queer partner?
No, I for sure think that it impacts their identity. It can be really confusing. It can feel almost degrading, like we mentioned earlier. Like, what is so wrong with me that one, I can't even hold a relationship? Because even after the relationship ends, so there's still those feelings of like self doubt or blame. I remember I had a client share with me that he was like, I can't even hold gay friendships. He was like, "I just don't understand, like, something is wrong with me, like, I can't even." My partner was telling me he's the only one who'll ever be able to love me or to contain me, and then I go out and I see, like, all these, these gay friend groups, like, all these gay guys with their Tom Ford sunglasses, their Gucci shoes, Louis Vuitton bags, whatever. I remember I was sitting there with my little Gucci shoes, like, "Ooh, let me hide them." But but I was like, I understand where you're coming from, because it can feel
Mhm,
so isolating in a relationship, and then to suddenly come out of it, and then you're still not having without like a understanding of yourself and who you are, is that being queer is an important part of your identity, but it's also not the entirety of
mhm,
your identity. And
yeah,
Nashville is also one of those cities where like every queer person knows like every queer person. So it is, sometimes you got to think of the environmental things. Like look at where we're living too.
mhm,
That there are those cliques, that there are these things. So it can make feel sometimes I think with clients that, with affecting their identity, I really think it's like we said earlier with shame.
yeah, and it can also feel difficult to reach out to members of what you would consider your community, like your own, like, queer community, when you feel like you're not a part of that. or when you feel like there's this like you're like I'm not allowed to ask them for support because I'm not a part of them.
Hmm.
So there's another instance of feeling othered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I I totally agree, and then sometimes I wanted to add in, it's like, because the community can be so small, sometimes it's like, well, they might know this person, they might be like, "Oh, like, he would never do that. He wouldn't do that," or "There's no way." There's, like, all these plethora of things, like, it's unfortunately, it is true, like, unfortunately, I've read police reports, and I'm like, "Oh, like, I know this person. I know who this is," and, you just have to be like, "Okay, this happened," But also, I've also told clients we shouldn't expect the people that we love to do bad things.
Mhm.
And also, like, going into sometimes I always tell my clients, like, let's take a little break from relationships. Let's focus on like healing, but don't let this relationship stop you going into another one. Like, we shouldn't go into a relationship expecting that other person to hurt us. And then also, like, you didn't go into that relationship expecting them to hurt you.
Then yeah, that's I wonder, is there a case or a moment or like a story or anything, without disclosing any details, of course, that has stayed with you or shaped how you understand this issue? Like, is there anything you can kind of talk about in that way? Something that's been like significant for you?
I think for me, it was a big jump. I remember as a bachelor's student, that first week of like shadowing or like observing groups was very different. I think, even going into like the immigrant communities here, I remember there was a case I was sitting in on. It was, we had to use the language line because they did not speak English or Spanish. It was Arabic. And often in these communities, you'll see violence, whether it's non IPV or non IPV, like family domestic violence or IPV, whenever there are cases of families, especially big immigrant communities, where there might be a three-bedroom house, but 10 people are living in there. And there are cases where one, like the owner, sometimes the man is sexually assaulting another man, kind of holding it against his will. Like, you will not, like, if you say anything, you'll be kicked out. You won't have anywhere to go, because sometimes they really don't have anywhere to go. And seeing how, like, that power can hold people. I think one of the most haunting things for me, and I processed it now. This is a trigger warning for sexual assault, for rape. It was my first time observing a group, and it was domestic violence in Spanish women's group. And the part of their exercise was to write a letter for their abusers. And this woman, she was crying, she was crying, she was crying, which is normal. It's to be expected because it's a lot of big feelings. But she was sharing with us that she wasn't crying for herself. She said that her own parents were in a domestic violence relationship when she was growing up, and she was in a domestic violence relationship and they had a son. She was telling her parents about how she was being treated, and her dad told her that's just the way relationships are and you have to stay. Like, there's no getting out of it. So she thought she had to stay until one day she got home. Her child was 5 at the time, severely autistic, nonverbal, and she walked in on her husband raping her son. And I just remember I had to like turn around in my chair because it was just like I like to use a lot of sound visuals. It felt like almost like a bunch of violins like squealing. It was just like this is real. Like these things happen. We don't see them. I know a couple personally. They're not together anymore. That on social media they look perfect. They look like the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, they were fighting. There was violence. There was threatened, like, cartel level violence from a family. There was throwing clothes down the stairs. I think another part of this didn't happen in this relationship. I just thought about it. They have pets. Harming pets is a big sign of someone who is in domestic violence. We know the gays love their fur babies. They know that we love their pets, those who have them. If your partner's hurting your pet, like, that is a big sign. So it's, not everything is always as it seems. That
Mhm,
it does exist, whether we see it or not. You know, you hear something about someone, it could likely be true.
mhm. I yeah, thank you for sharing what you've shared. I am like absorbing a lot of this like information. I like have, and I think anyone listening or whatever, like there's definitely a lot of feelings that are going to come up for somebody when they hear something like that. I want to ask you, I want to be conscious of time. I first want to thank you for coming on and speaking so eloquently because you're very well spoken. Has anyone ever told you that?
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah,
people.
they have.
That sounds so.
You're
That's
like, actually, yes.
yeah. They have.
You're like, I hear it all the time. Yeah, because you're very well spoken and you're very like, yeah, I find myself like wanting to listen to what you have to say. So I want to ask you my final question that I typically ask everybody. Is there an important quote that you have that has stuck with you or that holds a lot of weight for you? So I can give my example if you need it, but I'm wondering like if there's anything coming up for you of something you've heard through the years that you're like, that's a really important phrase or saying to me.
Yeah, give an example.
Okay. So my example is always this one. It's from Nicki Minaj, who I know is like the Nicki Minaj fandom is having we're having some tough times right now with her. But she said this several years ago. She was accepting an award and she said, I follow your dreams because one day you'll wake up and your dreams will be gone and you'll be mad at somebody, but be mad at your goddamn self.
Okay.
And I heard that and that quote like was really stuck with me. And I'm like, you know what? I have to do what I want to do. Like I have to follow like whatever dreams I have. So I think about that one a lot. So that's the one that comes up for me. I need to find a new one just because I've used that one so much. But I don't know. Is there anything like that that's coming up for you?
I feel like I have 3. They're kind of short. My
Mhm.
first one that I love and that I use with clients a lot, one of my good friends, Jerry, or we call him Chato, his quote that he used was "Do it scared." He says, "Do it,"
Yes, I
and
love that.
clients, I've used it with friends. It's just do it scared. No
Mhm.
explanation. Another one is from the pastor at my parents' church and my church back home, from Pastor Darren Brown. It's like the uncomfortable. You have to be uncomfortable before you get comfortable. So I've
Mhm.
used that a lot with clients, and sometimes with when we're trying to get into what a healthy relationship looks like. Sometimes a healthy relationship can feel uncomfortable because we're not used to it.
Right.
And so we have to do those things that make us uncomfortable. Sometimes that's being, it can feel uncomfortable to have a partner that's not down your throat or not demanding your location or not, all these toxic things that we can think of. So I've used that. I feel like I tell them every time I'm like, I use that. I think I heard it in like high school. I didn't listen very much to church when I was in school, but that has stuck with me and I use it all
Mhm.
the time in
I
therapy.
would also add it's okay to be bored with a partner. Like, I think people that come from chaotic backgrounds and stuff sorry to jump in here, but, like, I think when people come from chaotic backgrounds or they're used to, like, certain chaotic relationships, they interpret boredom in a relationship as, like, something incredibly negative, and it's like, "No, no, no. Being bored is a normal part of the human experience."
Yeah, like my boyfriend, like he thinks he's boring. Like his Instagram bio says like boring, boring, and more boring. But because I'm used to all these like I have a crazy life, I like that feeling of like security. Like it feels not stagnant, but it just feels like secure.
Stable.
Stable, yes. We
Mhm.
love words. And I think another thing I love to use, I had a wisdom. I had a college student I was working with whenever we left whenever we finished because he was going to study abroad. He had like a notebook full and he was like, I have a notebook filled of all your wisdom. And I was like, oh, I was like, I love working with college students, but one of my favorite artists, her name is Chiquis. Her mom, Jenny Rivera, one of the biggest icons of Mexican music, survived
Mhm.
domestic violence. Chiquis herself survived domestic violence, relationships, and child sexual abuse. One of my favorite things I think is, when she talks about self love and finding those things. Like, a lot of times it can be really hard to break these relationships. So I love to use, it's like, these statements, like these affirmations, like, I want to love myself so much that I'm going to take myself out of this relationship. Like, what does self love look like? Does it look like financial security? Does it look like, I love myself so much that I want to, figure out how to save money? It's like, does this situation give my heart peace?
Mhm.
Does this situation give my heart peace to stay here? If not, what do I need to do? Because if sometimes clients are like, I don't love myself. It's like, what can we do to find that love within ourselves? Because self love is the best love. Spanish quote, mejor sola que mal acompañada. It's like better alone than with bad company. I think instead of saying loneliness, it's our freedom.
Thank you
You
so much for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and everything that you have. I appreciate it so much. Um, yeah, I'm really really glad that you came on, and I'm happy that we did this and this information and this topic was talked about. And I hope to talk about it more.
I know. Yes, I think it's still up and coming. I want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful, to be able to be here and speak about it. Also, thank you to my queer cousins up north who not probably far from you, who like sent me this podcast a couple weeks ago. We love to journal and just discuss. So it's just
Mhm.
so cool to go from like listening and having you talking and me writing it down in my big ass notebook to now getting to speak.
Yeah, don't make me emotional. Don't make me emotional. Um, thank you so much.
Thank you.